Before you do PGT testing, you might want to pause and take a look at the latest news on what the test is capable of screening out and what it can miss. So, first of all, my name is Karen. I'm from the Beyond IVF Baby channel, and my fertility struggle lasted me nearly 10 years. So, I finally conquered um, and defeated that issue after more than 9 years of different IUI, IVF, and other experimental treatments such as PRP. So I have a little bit of a fertility news update. A couple of weeks ago in October, some news came out regarding the PGT testing. So what this test is, after you have your IVF procedure, you have the option, besides using the embryologist expert opinion and how they grade the embryos, to have those embryos frozen. A tiny segment of that embryo is removed so that it can be tested and screened. Therefore, before you implant the embryo, you have a better idea of what issues could be, if it's really a grade A, which is a top embryo, or if there are problems. Now, what do I mean by genetic abnormalities? So basically, the one we all are very familiar with is probably Down syndrome. Now, Down syndrome isn't going to cause an embryo to fail to implant necessarily, or cause there to be a miscarriage. It depends on the severity, of course, and whether conditions that could be. However, there are many different issues with the chromosome division from the male and from the female that can cause there to be an embryo implant, but then things will pause and stop. There'll maybe not be a heartbeat ever, or if there is a heartbeat, there will be one, and then it will fade away. It will stop. So, who should consider PGT testing? Well, for full disclosure, after years and years of procedures, I opted to finally give it a try. Initially, I was going to do it, but then I ended up not doing it earlier in my initial IVF, and then I decided it makes sense to do it because more was at stake with each passing year that was going by for me. So it was really urgent to make sure we weren't wasting time as well as money, right? Because when you have that frozen embryo implanted, if you're not doing a fresh cycle, that costs money. It's a couple $1,000s. You have your injectable medications, you have your doctor's fees, you have your monitoring fees, and etc. So it's a lot of money, probably about $5,000 plus, just to have that frozen embryo implanted, apart from, the cycle cost of your IVF, the testing costs. PGT is not cheap either. It's quite a few $1,000s. And if you have more than, I think, 8 embryos, it's going to cost more money. So it's really, there's a lot of things at stake with, finances being one of them. If we do get the IVF Trump insurance benefits through, I would say, larger companies, more than likely it would be the only way this would be possible. I don't see that working with the Obamacare kind of policies. All these other procedures, which can be really good for you and could be very much a time saver as well, may or may not be something that's a financial viability. So, what to keep in mind? PGT, you're trying to screen this embryo to help prevent there from being a miscarriage, or if you, and I'm going to say something controversial, if you're trying to weed out the chance of having a special needs child. Many people are in that boat, that perhaps they can't handle it, they're not at the right financial place in their life, or they don't want to give up their entire life for a special needs child. And there are people that are definitely in that boat. This particular screening could reduce the chances. And I would say like in the 90%. It's definitely not a foolproof test. Now, what this article is saying is that, basically after the test is done and then the embryos get frozen again, perhaps, or all but one gets frozen, and perhaps you choose, the top quality one that's both passed the testing as well as got the green light from the embryologist, and that's the one you will choose to implant first, and everything else gets frozen for later. The things to keep in mind is that what this new article came out with has determined is that any kind of cell division that continues, which of course, if you're going to have an embryo develop into a baby, there's a lot more division that's going to happen during those key moments after it's been implanted and it's going to actually take and become a pregnancy. We don't know exactly what errors could happen, and the PGT testing cannot screen for that. Also, the article mentioned if there is a single issue in terms of, it's not something that's both on the male and female side when there's a division. So a trisomy is when one of the parents give two and one of the parents give one. So that's a mismatch, and that's going to probably 99.9% of the time, depending on which gene that is, it's going to cause a miscarriage. So early on, probably, definitely the first trimester. Now, other things, other types of conditions, maybe they won't, maybe they will, but it depends. Some of them will depend on the severity of it, or some of it will depend on exactly what the error is going to be, or what the problem with the embryo will be because of that. So, weighing the pros and cons, things to consider. If you did, let's say you have PCOS and you wound up with a lot of embryos, maybe you had like 20, 30 embryos. Okay, not all of those embryos are probably going to be healthy, thriving embryos. You might need more help besides the embryologist expertise to help you determine which ones are the ones you should implant. Maybe in a case like that, you might want to just look at all the grade A's and AB's to make sure there's not an issue, because there could have been some poor egg quality or male factors that could cause a problem with those embryos. Another thing to look at is the age of the female or the male. Like if the male is like significantly older, over 50, and if the female is over 40, maybe you want to do this PGT testing to help screen, because everything tends to go up in terms of an increased risk with age, in terms of there being a genetic abnormality. Doesn't mean you can't have one if you conceive in your 20s. Of course you can, but your chance is so much more magnified the older you get. So that might be a time you want to give it a try. So all in all, you have to decide for you which is the best. It might be a financial decision on top of a decision that you would use that would be moral or religious, because maybe you don't want to discard embryos. Maybe it's better not to know and let nature kind of take over. So there are different reasons for doing different things. However, I think PGT has its place. It can help save you time on your journey, but the caveat is you could be incidentally eliminating embryos with a false positive for some kind of disorder or error where there really isn't one. And there's no way to truly know. Obviously, there is. You could biopsy that embryo, but then the embryo is not going to be usable or implantable. So those are things to keep in mind when weighing out the pros and cons of whether or not to do the testing. Of course, not all countries will allow or approve of this test. I think where I went to in Greece, the second time they did not allow it. However, many, I believe it wasn't a country law, it was just that individual clinic. So you have to do your work knowing where you plan to do your IVF, whether it's in the US or if you're going to go abroad. Besides the cost, you want to know certain details, what is allowed, what isn't allowed, and things like that. If it's something that really matters to you, then you're going to want to make sure you choose a clinic that gives you those options. If it doesn't, or maybe you're earlier in your journey and you want to kind of see what happens, then you have a little bit more time, then maybe you just want to let things happen naturally. So either way, I'm rooting for you. I wish you the best. And let me know in the comments if you chose to do PGT and if it's something that you feel strongly about, or after hearing the latest news and more issues that could arise with the testing not being 100%, if you regret doing PGT testing, do you think you eliminated some very viable embryos? Let me know what you think. I can't wait to hear from you. And until next time.